Sam, my mum said if it's all right with your mum, I can come round to record another episode of the podcast.
She said that's fine.
She said that's fine.
She said it's fine. Let's go.
Oh, thank goodness.
Cool.
Well,
hi everyone.
Hey everyone. Weird intro.
Weird intro. But it's us again, Sam
and Alasdair.
And today we are here for another episode of Wholala.
Wholala.
Wholala, the podcast where we talk all things Doctor Who, Whoniverse, and beyond.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a different episode today. We're not just doing an episode in review. We are sort of talking more about a topic. I think we want to expand the variety, spices the variety of life, and talk about different things, all things Doctor Who on the podcast.
I also wasn't ready for this. I thought we were doing The Unquiet Dead. So I've been writing
on
notes.
record, I messaged you about this earlier this week when we said we didn't know if we'd have time to prep The Unquiet Dead, so let's do something a bit closer to home.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this.
Well, guess what? I didn't read a single word you wrote. I just kind of nodded and replied, yeah, sounds great, babe, and didn't honestly absorb a single word. So I prepared The Unquiet Dead. You came to my flat a couple hours ago and just found me kind of cross-legged, watching the episode on iPlayer, making handwritten notes.
Yeah.
And you're like, why are you doing this?
I was like, that's next week.
That's next week. You're early.
I mean, it's good to be early.
Yeah, and it's also a great app, by the way, so tune back in. How would you title what we're actually doing here?
So one thing that I think I wanted to do going into this podcast is I wanted to talk a bit about how Doctor Who is sort of ingrained at this point in the queer community, and even right back to its history at the beginning of the show in the 60s, it's really got roots in queer history, more so I think since the revival, but it's just something that I think has genuinely made a stamp on my life. I believe it's made a stamp on yours, and I think it has on a lot of people.
You believe?
I believe.
Here we are, sat once again under my desk with a duvet over our heads for the fourth week in a row now, and we're like, I think this may have had some impact on us. I don't know.
Something may have happened.
Something's up, guys.
Something along the road led to this, and I think a big part of that is the link that Doctor Who has to the queer community, and I think that was something that I definitely wanted to talk about this week.
Yes, and we had a little pre-chat about this moments ago. Mere moments. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to get into. There's stuff that, surprised me, I think, when you dig into it, that's really worth talking about. For
sure, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of personal experience we can draw from. There's a lot of history with the show, and also more so since the revival of the show, there are so many queer characters within the show. And I think that has certainly had an impact in my life, certainly had an impact on other people, and just also had an impact, I would go as far to say, as television as a whole. Not to get too deep right at the beginning of the episode.
Oh, no, here we are.
But I do think that society and the world changes when it's shown what it can be, and TV and film are two of the biggest medium for that. And I just want to dive into it. I want to have a bit of a chat.
Please, dive in.
Dive in, right.
Okay.
So I think I sort of wanted to start off by talking a little bit about where my personal views come from. Because I think that there's some people that might relate to it. Watching Doctor Who from the revival onwards, that was really, as we've spoken about before, my gateway into the show. And I think my first ever, genuinely, my first ever introduction to anything non-straight was the kiss at the end of series 1 with Captain Jack, where he very equally and very unsexually, I want to sort of say as well, kisses the Doctor and Rose. It's like a peck. He just kisses them goodbye because he thinks it's the last time he's ever going to see them. He's going to die. And I vividly remember I was at my grandparents' house and I watched that kiss, and I suddenly, it was just introduced to me the concept of not being straight.
Yeah. And
I remember going to school, and I would have been primary school, and asking all the old kids, so the old kids were year 6, they would have been 11 years old, but they were the old kids, and going around with my friend and saying, what does gay mean? And I have a vivid memory of walking around the playground and saying this to them, and they, bless them, there were these 3 girls, they were very sweet, and they just said, it just means you're happy. It just means you're happy.
Gay just means happy. It's not an insult, it means happy.
In a very traditional sense of the word, but I think that for me, opened up my eyes to queerness.
Funny enough, I had exactly the same memory. That is to me the most distinctive part. The only 2 things I remember in childhood, pre-teenage years, pre-12 years old, that I remember in my life that were standout things for me. One was Captain Jack.
Kissing the Doctor.
Captain Jack. Oh my God, the only queer representation we had was John Barrowman. And the other one, I think, was the introduction of civil partnerships in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there were civil partnerships in the mid-noughties. And I thought that was a novelty. I honestly thought, I mean, as a child, don't cancel me. I was 8.
A kid.
But I remember telling everyone I thought it was so funny. I was like, oh my gosh, have you heard, like, 2 men have got married?
Yeah.
LMAO.
But it was weird. It was
never,
a weird kind of
never
time.
thinking one day I'm going to, like, directly want to benefit from this change. But, yeah, that and, like, Captain Jack's omnisexuality.
Yeah.
That was my entire awareness.
He really is. And I've briefly touched on this in the podcast before, but I do want to talk a bit about Russell T Davies' writing and showrunning, because he has always been invested in queer storytelling. I think a big part of what makes queer people attracted to Doctor Who, and certainly from his writing in the show, is that it is so ingrained into the dialogue and the characters, but it is never the focus. It's never the point. It's never saying, hey, look at this gay character. Hey, look at this lesbian. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so Jack's pansexuality, the Doctor has a throwaway comment. I think that there was a TikTok, I don't know if you saw it recently, where they were resharing Rose uses gay as a slur earlier in the season, and people were like, I can't believe the BBC left this up, like, I can't believe they not cancelled it. But it's, it was being written by a gay man. The whole point of it is using it as like a social commentary for saying, look how stupid this is, look how ridiculous it is. And the Doctor has a conversation when Jack is first introduced with Rose, where she kind of realises they're not necessarily talking about gender, but aliens. Like, he will just flirt and dance with anyone.
Yeah.
He'll just screw anyone.
They don't give him a literal kind of
label.
used label. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that was something that Russell so intentionally built into the show, because it's just never the focus, specifically with Jack, but also with a lot of the queer characters that he was writing, when he talked about Cassandra being mentioned as having been a boy at one point in her life. And most people, certainly myself, I grew up in a very small village in a very sort of conservative area, and I wasn't exposed to gay people, to queer people. And it made me aware that they existed, that they're not weird, they're not, for want of a better word, alien.
Yeah.
They're just people. It's just part of their life. It's a facet of their being.
Yeah. I don't think I had any awareness of, and now I'm like really thinking about it. This is the first time I really thought about it as well. I don't think I've had any awareness of gay people until my teenage years. I'm thinking even as basic as, for example, like Elton John, Freddie Mercury. I don't think I was told about them being gay.
Oh no, I never was.
Until like late on. I knew who they were. Yeah. But do you know what I mean?
It's almost like the great unsaid, that with people like that, you see Elton John in these big, like, feathered, extravagant outfits and stuff, and you're aware of all that stuff. Yeah. But you're never distinctly told, oh, that's a gay man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't remember it ever being said in those words.
And it's interesting because when Doctor Who came back, in episode 1 in Rose, we didn't talk about it when we did the podcast on it, but it was the first time the word gay was used in Doctor Who. The Doctor's flipping through a magazine, and he goes, that's never going to work, he's gay and she's an alien.
Yeah.
And it's a throwaway comment, it's a joke, it doesn't have anything to do with the story. But I think it's interesting that in episode 1, RTD kind of like stamped that into there from the beginning, from the get-go.
The gay people exist in this world, at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was, in advance of this episode, I was reading up a lot about Classic Who to see if there was anything to do with that. And of course, a show written in the 60s can't involve queer inclusion. Yeah. And there's a lot of them talking now about how, well, that person was like insinuated. Oh, right. That person was coded. And that person was implied. Yeah. And I think Russell was like, no, I'm steering the ship here. I'm going to make sure people know that gay people exist, queer people exist. Yeah. And we're going to...
Yeah. So I think potentially a good place for us to talk about other queer characters in the show, because I've got a few other standouts I can think of. The one that I remember beyond this, which maybe I read as a joke at that age, but wasn't played as a joke, I don't think, was in the parallel world. There's a parallel Mickey Smith called Ricky Smith. And it turns out after Ricky's died, and Mickey decides to stay in the parallel world, that he had a boyfriend
the character had been there the whole time.
Yeah. The character had been there the whole time, called Jake, played by Andrew Hayden Smith. And that was another queer character I remember being in it. And it was kind of added as a sort of a casual point towards the end, right?
You do know that it was a deleted scene.
It was a deleted scene?
No, that wasn't in the episode. There's a deleted scene basically in that episode.
Oh, I've misremembered.
In the episode. But it's interesting that's because Jake's character, who of course is played by a gay actor, is there throughout the whole time, and he's really invested in his relationship, friendship, whatever you want to call it, with Ricky Smith. And he's devastated when later in the episode, spoiler alert, 2006, Ricky dies. And there's a deleted scene that they did film at the end where Mickey has chosen to stay in the parallel world, and he says, I'm not Ricky, you've got to know I'm not him. And then Jake goes, "Yeah, I know. I'll never have a boyfriend like him."
Yeah. So
But
that kind of point.
but the point is that they were intentionally written in the episode as boyfriends the whole time. They were lead characters, in 2 episodes, 2-parter, the biggest 2-parter of the season, I'd argue, even more than the finale, because it was the introduction of the Cybermen.
Yeah, huge. Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting. I think it's interesting they cut that out. I don't know whether that would have been Russell's intention or maybe the studio's.
I don't know.
But I do think that it's interesting that they were like written in there.
So maybe I did not remember that correctly then, because clearly it didn't have an impact. It wasn't in it.
No, but it's certainly like, I think the characters, whether or not they explicitly then say, my boyfriend, like they very clearly have love for each other, and that really does read on screen. And I think it just harkens back to what we were talking about in queer representation without being pointed and told this is a gay man, this is a boyfriend, this is a whatever. And what you were saying about bringing in different queer characters, I think that I've noticed there's been a lot of female queer inclusion outside of Russell's era, and I don't know if maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but it's interesting that for a gay man directing the show, he wrote really great queer relationships. He wrote about Captain Jack and Yanto within his era, had one of the realest, I think, relationships in the show. And I don't mean queer relationship, I just mean Jack and Yanto's relationship felt the most believable and invested in, or one of the most for me. I also love how he was intending for Sarah Jane Smith's son, Luke, sadly, obviously, before Elizabeth Sladen's passing. He was intended to be a queer character. He was going to come out as having dated his boyfriend from uni. But since Russell's era, going into Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall, there's been a lot more female queer inclusion. And I just think that's an interesting thing, that Russell was bringing a lot of male gay relationships. And then with, I'm assuming, these straight showrunners, and I'm not going to say how they identify, they're bringing a lot more female inclusion. I just think that's an interesting side to it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess at least there's a bit more balance there. I don't know if Russell wrote more of what he knew.
Yeah,
but
probably.
Yeah, it's the most full queer storylines. I felt like those happened still within the more adult content. So like within Torchwood, right?
Oh, for sure.
That's why we still put that stuff.
The most explicitly queer, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it was still dealt with as
this is for grown-ups.
Yeah, this is content for grown-ups. This is the mature stuff. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I feel like even the Captain Jack stuff, he was a risque character, right? Like he was super flirty, very sexual.
The joke almost in Doctor Who is that he will flirt with anyone. I think in series 3 when he comes back, he flirts with Martha, he flirts with everyone in Utopia. Like his joke is that he flirts with everyone.
Yeah.
And then I think in Torchwood, it is much more explored his male love interest, and he has multiple within the show. That's a really good observation, I think, on your part, of how they saved that for the show that's on later. It's after the Watershed, it's for grown-ups.
Right.
And it's like, you can include queer characters, but you can only look into the lives so much. Whereas in Doctor Who, which is a family show, or in even the Sarah Jane Adventures, which is a kid's show, she's having a wedding in one episode. That's the whole thing. She's finding a guy that she likes. That's a whole subplot there. And it's interesting, the distinction between not including the characters, but really looking into their lives and involving their love life. That's almost reserved for late night viewing.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me is that, I mean, I could be really naive. Maybe I've missed a huge chunk of Twitter discourse here. Possible. But I don't recall there being any upset or significant uproar anyway about the fact that Jodie Whittaker was a same-sex attracted doctor, right? Like, in that as a woman, she was attracted to her female companion. To me, that just made absolute sense, right? That the doctor always is just attracted to women. Like whatever the doctor's form, right? And that so be it. So I guess this, like, for the first time, makes the doctor a queer lead.
It's an interesting one with the doctor, because they've spoken before. I think there was a conversation with the 12th Doctor and Bill where he was saying about gender. I think he was saying like Time Lords have grown beyond your silly ideas of gender. And I think there's probably at some point been a reference to the Doctor being attracted to a man, nothing too in depth, but you're right in that to the viewer, the Doctor has always been attracted to women, and so the fact that the Doctor happens to be a woman and is still attracted to women, is that then changing their sexuality? Is it not? Does it matter?
Yeah, it seems that the Doctor's sexuality certainly didn't flip with
the
new gender.
That's a very interesting point, I think.
Into being, here we are.
No, I like men.
Yeah, time for a male companion that I fancy instead. You know what I mean? So I'm glad they didn't. Yeah, I can't recall there being any kind of upset about there being, for example, I mean, people will say that, Yaz and the Doctor's and fair enough, that their relationship wasn't developed enough on screen. But I don't recall there being upset that there was a relationship on screen.
I think from what I heard, and it might just be my echo chamber, I think that it was mainly positive. It was clear, at least to me, that it wasn't intended when they introduced Yaz for her to be a love interest with the Doctor, and that came from, I think, listening to the fans, and the fans were wanting it. They wanted Phasmin, and in that way grew quite naturally, I'd say. I do agree with you that I think that it's good that they're not suddenly saying, well, Doctor's a woman now, gotta like a guy.
Yeah.
Like, they're just sort of going
that would have
with
been
the
absurd.
it would have been
totally
ridiculous.
Absurd. That would have been mad. I heard a fan say recently that they met Alex Kingston at a convention and they said, can you do a piece of spin-off Big Finish content, please, with River and 13? And she said, I can make that happen.
Really?
Her words. She said, I can make that happen. So, I mean, you heard
I mean,
it
she's
here
writing books.
first.
She's writing River Song. But what's the alias that River Song has? Melody Malone.
Yeah.
She's like Alex Kingston has a book out, a Melody Malone book that she wrote. Yeah, because River is very clearly pansexual, I think omnisexual, in the same way that you were talking about Jack. She has commented all the time about like getting with aliens, getting with guys, getting with girls and stuff. Like, I think she loves the Doctor and she always has love for the Doctor, but I think that she's a very queer character. But
fun.
maybe in the same way that like Clara is sort of written as bisexual and that she's commenting about good kisses.
What we could say about a poorly written queer character is how, every version of Clara the Doctor meets before he meets the real original Clara is kind of a split version of her and kind of a copy.
Yeah.
So he meets Oswin Oswald.
The Dalek Oswin.
Yeah, on the crashed spaceship Alaska.
Yeah.
And she says to Rory something about, I dated a girl called Nina.
Yeah.
I was going through a phase.
Ooh, that does not sit well. And especially, I think, with, I don't know if Stephen Moffat's talking about it before, but then with, like, I guess main universe Clara, when she does talk about, like, Jane Austen, I think it was Jane Austen.
Oh yeah,
she's such a good kisser,
amazing kisser. Yeah,
like,
it's a little bit, it's a bit fetishy, isn't it?
It is a bit fetishy.
It's a bit,
it's a bit Quentin Tarantino.
It'd be like, that'd be like a hot dimension to her, wouldn't it? If she's a bit flexible. Do you know what I mean? That's how it's written, isn't it? More so
I completely forgot about that line where she's like, I was going through a phase.
It's a bit. So, yeah, I didn't love that, but that was quite funny. I think what's interesting as well is the way that the social climate has changed so much, even in the time the show has been on. I mean, we've actually had some tangible new rights in the time that the show has been on.
Some we have had
quite a collection. We had the Equality Act in the time the show was on.
I mean, can
you believe season 4 was on before the Equality Act?
No, I can't. So I was going to talk about classic Who, 60s onwards, but no, you're right. Since 2005,
the entire Russell T Davies era was aired without gay marriage being legal.
Aired without gay marriage being legal.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear a really weird fact?
Yeah, go on.
Gay marriage was not legal in the UK until Peter Capaldi was the Doctor.
Shut up.
Do you know when gay marriage was legal in the UK?
Well, I thought it was 2010.
It was 2014. Peter Capaldi was the Doctor when gay marriage became legal. We had Christopher Eccleston, and I don't even give a shit about classic Who. I mean, I do. I care about classic Who, but in the context of this, Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Matt Smith, the Day of the Doctor crossover, and Peter Capaldi becoming the Doctor. All of that happened before gay marriage was legal in the UK.
Oh my god.
Isn't that wild?
That's utterly wild. That's utterly wild. That's really shocking. That's honestly shocking to me. That honestly, for me, puts in perspective more than anything else how recent some of the changes have been.
Really, honestly, I mean, to my own detriment, I think I date specific moments in my life and in history as to what Doctor Who episode was airing at the time. But then when you flip that and you look at sort of big queer moments and LGBT history, and then relate that to what episode Doctor Who was out then, you realise how scarily recent all of this stuff is.
I think I forget as well that a lot of Doctor Who is older than we think it is too.
That's true. It feels very recent.
So a lot of it, feels newer than it is. But even the Capaldi era almost concluded,
nearly 10 years ago.
2017 did it end?
It ended in 2017, but it started in 2014.
So we're a little far off, yeah.
No, but we're 8 years away from when Capaldi's era started.
Oh, that's crazy, isn't it?
It's weird. I do actually want to go on to talking a bit about classic Who and the lack thereof rights that we had at the time. But before that, one last sort of queer character I want to look at is Vastra and Jenny in the Paternoster Gang. Because... Oh, that was an ominous old girl.
That was an old god. I'm not a fan.
Not a fan.
It's weird representation. I don't like it. I'm not into it.
The thing that I don't love is, so they were the first Well, they weren't the first. So people like to say they were the first same-sex relationship on Doctor Who, which I don't necessarily agree with, but we'll move on from that. The lizard lady is giving her wife
Not the lizard lady.
oxygen because they're holding their breath for some reason, and their lips touch while she's like into her mouth. And then everyone was like, I love representation.
Oh my god,
It was ridiculous. I'm sorry.
No, I know. I just, I feel like this is where we get heat and we get a whole podcast shut down.
And if people like them, that's fine. That's fine. Just our opinions.
Also, the lizard. I think the whole thing a joke, right? Like
it did make it feel very.
It was a whole piss take. The whole character of Astra, right, is that she's like an ancient Silurian lizard.
Yeah.
Eats humans, by the way. Like she's not like a.
She kills Jack the Ripper in like the first episode we see her.
Right, and then like she says like, oh, he was.
Gritty or something like that.
Gritty, yeah. It's just like weird and gross, and I'm not into that. Being like, oh yes, like representation. I'm like, oh yeah.
And also, Jenny's
win
like
for
her
the lesbians.
servant. You should not have sex with your employees.
No, you shouldn't. And their whole dynamic's weird. And I'm not into it. I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, I know. I get that. I like what Stephen Moffat was trying to do, and what I do give him credit for is they were a very recurring character. It wasn't written once as a one-off joke. I think if they had just been in A Good Man Goes to War, which was the one episode in series 6 that introduced them, I think that would have been considered a joke. But they came back in multiple episodes as quite meaty, weighty characters with multiple doctors, and there was a big call out for them and Strax Sontaran to get a spin-off together, which, to be honest, I would have been interested to see. But I don't like how much light that gets as great queer representation, because I just don't think it is.
Yeah, I agree, and not all of it's poor in this. You know what I'm going to say as well? I feel like Chibnall, again, let me be a chip defender. Let me be a
chip defender to the end.
Let me be a club of one. I think a lot of his representation, I think, is done well, is done subtly, is done
with respect,
respectfully.
Thoughtfully. I'm not sure. I'd have to look back if he was involved in the writing of the episode Rosa, but Rosa, I think, is one of my favourite Doctor episodes, certainly of his era, representation-wise. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, I think like a lot of it on and off screen is decent. I think there was a lot of firsts in his era that were done reasonably well.
Well, I want to touch a bit on Classic Who. We've spoken almost entirely about New Who, which I think is fine because you couldn't really, certainly in the 60s and 70s, you couldn't really have much queer representation. But one thing I think is really worth touching on is Waris Hussein. Now, Waris is the first ever director of Doctor Who. He directed The Unearthly Child. Yeah. And he was very involved with like Verity Lambert in getting Doctor Who made. It was almost like the Ugly Duckling show of the BBC. They didn't really care about it. They weren't giving much time. And he was very involved in getting it done. Obviously not out at the time. He is a gay man and a gay person of colour. And to have someone like that as the first director of Doctor Who, I can't stress the importance of that enough. And he spoke about it recently. So he was interviewed on the Doctor Who fan show, and there's a quote from that interview that, if the audience don't mind me reading a quote, I'd like to share.
Read it. You'll read it so well.
So he says, the thing about Doctor Who is because he's able to transport you to all sorts of worlds that you have no identification with, I think it has a lot to do with solving people's loneliness. And the fact that he encourages other people who are equally lost or finding themselves. His companions are the ones who are more grounded in where they come from, and he doesn't have a home. He depends on his wits and depends on the people he encounters and the relationships he chooses to make.
I think that's so true.
I think it's so true.
Yeah, there's a lot that we've talked about before that mirrors the queer experience in Doctor Who in terms of kind of the escapism, the chosen family, the
finding yourself,
finding identity, like all of those themes.
And changing identity. I think, like, not to take regeneration so literal, but a lot of a queer person's life is regenerating at different points and becoming new people.
Yeah, absolutely. Marking different chapters of your life. Coming to terms with your identity and not just doing it once but doing it over and over and over again, reintroducing yourself over and over again. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think all of those parts feel familiar for queer people. I think probably actually thinking about this for the first time and just like, you know, sitting off the top of my head
with a microphone under you.
Where microphone under me. I think that's probably part of what makes a regeneration story so interesting and so appealing is it's that kind of coming to peace with one part of your life and letting go of it and then moving into a whole new chapter, and then that whole reintroduction and saying to people, this is who I am now. You know, do you like
I'm the same person I was before, but I'm also new. I'm also I am
and do
the
you
same,
like all these bits of me that are different?
But no, I do think that it's a really interesting point you're making about how intentional or not, so much of the nature of what Doctor Who is as a show mirrors so much of a queer person's experience. And I do think that's a huge part as to why they relate with the show so much and why it has such a big queer following.
There's, I think, lots to be said as well about in the companion journey, even there as well. I mean, a lot of this is universal. It's not just about the queer experience, but as well, I think there's a lot there about there's this kind of enlightening that they go through, right? Where they kind of like, they find a world kind of like beyond their doorstep and they're like, whoa. And it kind of almost like changes them as they discover more of it. Yeah, like as the world becomes bigger for them, their attitude to it changes as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, which is quite nice too.
Much as I genuinely could talk about this forever, I think there is so much interesting discourse on this. We only have one episode of the podcast. I think we might have to do, not necessarily next week, but we'll have to do a part 2 of this at some point, because there's a lot to unpack.
Listen, we'll keep the conversation going.
Keep the conversation going.
Because you know what, this is an important conversation.
It's an important conversation, which you're always welcome to discuss with us on our Twitter at Wholala Pod. I would like to leave you on one interesting fact, which I do think encompasses just how huge the LGBTQ+ fan base for Doctor Who is.
Yeah.
So in 2008, it was Series 4 of Doctor Who, and the finale of Series 4 was bringing all the companions back. It was bringing the Daleks, it was bringing Davros, and it was, I would say, like the Avengers Endgame of Doctor Who at that point. And the finale of that series just happened to air on the same day as London Pride, and they were aware that the following was so big and so many people would want to watch the episode that they set up a cinema sort of style screen in Trafalgar Square, and they paused Pride celebrations on Pride 2008 to screen the finale of Doctor Who.
That is unreal.
At Pride.
That is unreal.
I found that out today while I was doing some research this episode,
That's
and that
unreal.
floored me. I've never heard, and I've been to multiple Prides in London and otherwise, never heard of them pausing it for a TV show.
No.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And it's not a quote-unquote gay show. It's not like, I mean, Russell's written loads of incredible queer shows. It's a Sin, Banana, Cucumber, Years and Years. I can't fathom that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I mean, I would love for Doctor Who to be that culturally relevant again. Yeah. But I think it will always have that really special place in people's hearts. For that reason. Oh, shut up. Shut up. Both meouts are so full of love.
So full of love. And I think that's a great place to leave this week.
That's a great place to leave it, because you know what? We've left a roast in the oven this whole time.
Oh yeah, we're cooking a roast at the same time. We've left my boyfriend, bless him, who's in the other room keeping an eye on the roast while we've been recording. We better go help. But thank you for sticking with us this episode. I know it's a bit of a different one, but we would like to branch out for different episodes. I think we continue looking at New Who, and I think we sort of go through that in order. But we'd love to do episodes on different topics to do with Doctor Who, like this one. Look back on classic episodes, look back on spin-offs. So if any of you have any suggestions for what you'd like us to do going forwards, please let us know. Let us know on Twitter.
Get in touch and let us know your memories as well of how Doctor Who has been important to you as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. You can always reach out to us at Wholala Pod on Twitter, or let us know on the podcast.
Yeah, let us know. All
Thanks
right.
so much. Well, have a lovely day.
Cheers.
Cheers. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.